This is ODAT Chat, your instant connection to recovery and community, one day at a time. This podcast may contain strong language, sexual content, and spiritual truth. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi, friend. Thank you for joining me on the ODAT Chat podcast. My name is Arlena, and I'll be your host. Today, my guest is Paul Churchill, host of the hugely popular Recovery Elevator. I can hardly wait to introduce you to him, but before I do, you know I have to talk about SoberLifeSchool.com. I'm excited to share that the website is undergoing a major facelift, and when it's done, I will have new dates for live online classes. These classes are intended to facilitate transformation to help those of you who struggle with things like social anxiety and isolation. So in small groups of sober women, we will transform, connect, and learn to live inspired together. So it's an amazing experience, and I hope you will join us. For dates and more information, visit SoberLifeSchool.com. Okay, so check it out. I realize I always say this, that I'm excited to introduce you to my new guest, but I can't help myself. I am actually thoroughly tickled pink to introduce you to Paul Churchill. One of the reasons I am so impressed with him is because he was brave enough to jump into recovery podcasting when he was just 5 months sober. He now facilitates retreats, exotic sober trips. He has a thriving online sober community, and he is absolutely changing lives. So with that, please enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with Paul. Paul, thank you so much for joining me on the ODAT Chat podcast.
Arlena, it's great to be here. How are you doing?
I'm great. I am so excited to be talking to you today. I've been following Recovery Elevator, your podcast, and you do all kinds of fun things, which I really like to talk about. I think a lot of times on these podcasts, I get a little maybe too into the problem and kind of what brought people to, recovery to begin with. I think it's so important to start focusing on not only just solutions, but having fun in sobriety.
I totally agree with that one. Thanks for having me. And Arlena, I had you on my podcast, and your episode launched on July 29th. You rocked it. You knocked it out of the park yourself with ODAT podcast. It's a pretty cool project you got going on yourself. You're doing fantastic work.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, listen, I certainly have a soft spot in my heart for people who are trying to bring the message of recovery to the masses. So I really appreciate you for that. And we're going to have to talk about your sober trip in January to Asia, because that sounds like, you not only, so here's the thing, we get sober, right? And then what do we do with the rest of our lives? Let's not dwell on the past. Let's have some fun and live lives of good purpose. So can we just start out with just talk a little bit about your trip to Asia?
Absolutely. Let's get right into that. So in 2014, I was a chaperone for my buddy who had taught a social studies course about the Incas. And he was able to take his high school class to Machu Picchu, and we did the Inca Trail. And he's like, "Hey, Paul, you want to be chaperone? Free trip, 2014." I'm like, "Hell yes, let's do it." Went down there, and I was struggling at the time. And I did everything in my power to stay sober before. And I think I had a couple weeks of sobriety before. And on the airplane ride down there, I wasn't able to sleep. And I justified to myself, I was like, well, tomorrow I'm going to have to be on point. I need to sleep. So I'm going to have one glass of wine on this overnight flight to Lima, Peru. And we already all know that didn't happen. One glass of wine, one glass turned into like 5 on the airplane. And then I had a 6-hour layover, an overnight layover in the Lima International Airport. That turned into 7 more beers. And then I fly into Cusco, get there like at 6:30 a.m. And I walk past the guy who's holding the sign that says Paul Churchill, like my taxi driver, walk right past him, go to the bar in the airport. It's like 7:45. I drink, I think maybe like my 10th drink.
Oh man.
Yeah. And then the taxi driver takes me to the hotel where the kids are staying. And my buddy's like, "Everybody, this is Mr. Churchill."
Mr. Churchill.
it's not funny. It kind of is. Nobody knew I was drinking up until that moment. My breath probably reeked of alcohol. And I came clean to my best friend, Brady, who's in my fantasy football league. And he's been a huge support for me on this journey. But I did the trip with him for like 12 days and I didn't drink. I was a chaperone, sober chaperone for these kids. And then my plan was to stay another like month and a half or 2 months in South America. And so I said goodbye to the kids. And I was like, here goes the next chapter of my sober life. I'm going to cruise around Peru, Bolivia, Argentina, Chile, and without any alcohol. I was drunk 5 hours later.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah. And so what should have been like this trip of a lifetime, because the itinerary was incredible. It was incredible. It sucked, Arlene. It was terrible. I mean, I was like
the whole time.
Like I did the cognitive discourse gauntlet with that. For example, like I did 3 days in Bolivia without alcohol. I did a tour.
Were you miserable though?
Well, here's the thing, like alcohol wasn't served. I did a jungle tour in the Amazon, on the Amazon River. There was no alcohol. So I left that tour. I'm like, I can't have a problem with alcohol. There's no way I'm an alcoholic. I just did 3 days.
Yeah.
And then I would just go big. Like I took a 15-hour bus ride over the Andes and threw up on myself. I won't be able to sleep. I need vodka. And so it was just this like brutal, lonely, and there were some fun times in there, but I was really struggling with alcohol. And so everybody loves to travel. I think I do. I'm sure you do too. And that's where the idea of sober travel was born. I was like, wow, what if I could do this with other people who didn't drink? Now, I had no idea how to put the pieces together. I had no idea at that moment I was going to start a podcast probably 10 months later called Recovery Elevator. No clue. And then what we did is, people started to ask like, hey, we can do meetups, we can do retreats, we can do trips. And so we did our first sober trip last year back to Peru. Trail. There was 25 of us who did the Inca Trail, visited Cusco.
Oh, that's amazing. I hear it's very spiritual.
Yeah, the Sacred Valley, it's an energy vortex, and there's 2 of them on the planet.
Are you serious? That's a real thing?
Yeah, there's several of them, but these are 2 big ones, and the opposite one is in Nepal. If you were to put like a straight line through the planet Earth, the globe, one would go through the Sacred Valley, and the other one would exit a city in Nepal. There's a lot of energy. It's an energy vortex. Sedona, Arizona is a city that has a lot of energy. Yeah. And so we did this trip. And it was incredible, right? We get up early, and we do things that we don't drink. Like we actually go and travel, and we use the full 12, 15 to 18 hours in a day, where we've all been on these trips where we want to go travel, but then wait a second, I'm hungover for half the day, or I'm sleeping until noon or 10 a.m. So half the trip's even gone. And some of us, including myself, we've even had trips where the whole thing is just wasted. And in these trips, it's not so much you get a group of people that can't do something, like we can't drink alcohol. It's not even the problem. We don't even talk about it. It's we get a group of people together that want to do things, and we just don't drink. And that's the mindset behind these trips. It's not like we're moping around and be like, oh, I guess we'll do that. We can't drink. It's not even the issue, right? And it's also, we have like workshops built in, and the connection happens so fast, Arlena. Like day one, we're talking about what's holding us back in life, what we're struggling with. And that's the magic that happens when you get a collective group of like-minded individuals that all have the same common collective goal of living life without alcohol. It's fascinating. Yeah. So we're going to Asia this January 20th to the 31st. We fly into Thailand for its 12-day trip. Go to Thailand, Bangkok, some national parks, Elephant World, Angkor Wat, Cambodia. And then we leave on the 31st out of Cambodia. Yeah, it's gonna be a good time.
Oh, that's so exciting. Can you, listen, I'm a workshop junkie. Can you tell me a little bit about what kind of, what your workshops are about when you go on these trips?
Yeah, the list isn't quite finalized for the Asia trip, but we've got the retreat, their annual Recovery Elevator retreat in Bozeman this August. And for that, we have changing the narrative around your story. It's what we're going to do is change the vibrational frequency around your story. I've got a meditation guru coming in. Her name is Elaine Huang from Embodiment of Freedom. She's going to be doing an 1.5-hour meditation workshop. We're doing breath work. I've got Clarity Breath Work certified workshop presenters coming to do that. There's three others that we're going to do. I'm trying to think what they are off the top of my head.
Where's Bozeman?
Bozeman is in the southwest corner of Montana. Yeah. Oh, we're also doing a somatics, a Hannah somatics licensed practitioner is doing that. It's calming the mind using your pathways to your central nervous system. Another one is we're doing brain spotting, which allows you to drop into spots in the brain and body where past traumas are stored and releasing that energy. And so the workshops are awesome. They are. However, I want to be clear, they're completely secondary to the relationships and the connections you're going to make. Does that make sense, Arlena?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, once you go through an experience like this with somebody, I feel like it bonds you for life, not unlike, it's interesting. It's like when you go out drinking, it's a very bonding experience. Like I'm a sales girl, right? And they always tell you to take your customers out. And, obviously I'm not drinking with my customers, but back in the day when I was, it's like you become like best friends. It's a bonding experience, right? So not sustainable in my life. So I love the idea that, and I've been on retreats before where you go on these retreats and you spend time with people and you get in like a safe environment that facilitates that deep heart connection and sharing. And you develop this love and compassion for other people. Like you see their frailties and their weaknesses and you look past that and to their essence and you end up loving them and loving yourself better. And I want to go now. It's like, that sounds so amazing. I want to do some brain spotting.
We got a spot for you, Arlena. Just let me know.
Yay. Yeah. And you're not that far from me now that I'm in Idaho.
8 hours.
Sweet. Listen, I am super pumped. That sounds really exciting. And for those listening, I'll obviously leave links in the show notes. But if they just want to jump over to your website, it's at Recovery Elevator. Is that right?
RecoveryElevator.com. At the top right-hand corner says events, and you'll see there. Yeah.
We like events. Woohoo.
Events too.
Awesome. Well, listen, let's take a little step back. I'm so interested in family of origin stuff. That's usually where I'm like, I have 1,000 questions, but why don't you walk me through sort of, your family of origin, and then maybe kind of get into a little bit about, when you started drinking, why you started drinking, and maybe sort of the cause and effects of all that for you.
Absolutely. Okay. Grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah. And this is somewhat important because it was a big part of the why I drank. I was one of a couple non-Mormons in a school of over 1,200 kids and had to blend in. I did. Nothing wrong with Mormons, incredibly nice people. However, there were some traumas in there that I didn't fully realize or process till later on in life. Some major people-pleasing skills and techniques were developed that were extremely beneficial at the time. However, later in life, they didn't serve me as well, and I needed to address those later in life. And so I started drinking when I moved to Colorado at the age of 13. And I'm a firm believer that addiction is multifaceted. It is underpinnings to so many different things, biological, partly genetic. I don't think it's a full-on like 100% genetic thing. In fact, I think it's more environmental than genetic. And another thing that I've been harping on for a long time is enhanced dopamine receptors. So this is something that in our past evolutionary traits would work in our favor. So some people experience things differently. This is just normal. Some people experience heat differently, experience ice cream differently. They taste things differently. And one common response when I've asked over 250 people on my podcast, what was it like when you first drank? That we experience alcohol differently. And I feel that's due to enhanced dopamine receptors. It was like I got this nostalgic, wow, the euphoria. Like, this is what I have been missing. While other people who don't struggle with alcohol, it's like, all right, well, I didn't really get it. Beer didn't taste quite as good as my Diet Pepsi or my Pepsi or a Slurpee. But for me, it was different. And so I loved it from the start. Now, I was a normal drinker, or shall I say, I didn't have a problem, or I didn't question my drinking till the age of 22. What that means is I could take her or leave it. And what that means even a layer deeper is I never asked the $1 million question of, do I have a drinking problem? Which essentially simply asking that question answers the question. It's just people who don't have problems with alcohol, they rarely, or if ever, say, I wonder if I have a drinking problem. They don't ask that question because they don't have a drinking problem. So I started to ask that question right around the age of 21, 22. I had a rough summer where I had my heart broken in a relationship, and I used to be in bands. I played guitar in bands. We not toured, but we played a bunch of venues and clubs in Hollywood and LA and San Diego and Santa Barbara. That band broke up in that summer of, I think it was 2004, 2003. And I was working at the Orange County Fair parking lot duty, rough job out on the blacktop on a hot summer day. And I remember the first night I came home and drank a 6-pack of Michelob Ultra Solo. And I was like, all right, this medicine, this elixir, this works. And I rolled with it for a long time. And I've always been an entrepreneur, kind of an out of the norm. And I had a finance job lined up after college. And I said, screw this. I recently studied abroad in Spain, loved it. And I wanted to go back and open up a bar.
Open up a bar in Spain.
Yeah, seriously, right?
Sure, of course. Why not?
Yeah, that's pretty traditional.
Finance, bar, same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I actually did major in business and Spanish, so it does make perfect sense. Yeah.
Look at you.
And I saved, I think like almost $30,000, and I borrowed.
Good for you.
Yeah, I borrowed a little bit more from my parents, some more from a friend. I went out there to Granada, Spain, and I bought half of a bar with a Spaniard named Romo, and owned and operated a bar for almost 3 years, and it was the best, worst time of my life, Arlena.
Best worst time because you had all the access to the alcohol, and you were the man at the bar. I bet the ladies loved you. Yeah.
I mean, that stuff was everywhere. It was great. I was 24, I think, and people would be like, "Wait, how old are you? And you own a bar?" I mean, yeah, it was crazy. I was on top of the world.
You're a fucking baller. Good for you.
Top of the mountain, right? Usually what happens when you're at the top of the mountain, you fall off the top. And that's exactly what happened. Right around like...
You tumbled all the way down. I got it.
Oh, like all the way down. And it all had to happen. But I found myself totally addicted to alcohol. Was unable to sleep.
What kind of consequences were you having? Were you like blacking out and obviously being sick? And
Yeah. So I was blacking out like 5 to 7 nights per week, totally saying, "Hey, Arlena, look, this is normal. Arlena, I own a bar. That's what bar owners do."
Yeah.
They drink all their inventory. They black out every night. They give half the bar away, and they have a shitload of fun. This is totally normal. Right. It wasn't normal. You used the word it wasn't sustainable. It wasn't. And one night I got in a taxi cab and said, "Go to the hospital. I'm having a heart attack." Go to the hospital. The guy's like, "Dude, you're not. It's a major, you're having a panic attack."
Anxiety, yeah.
They feel the same, apparently. Gave me a benzo. And
was the anxiety something that you had struggled with before, or like in high school and stuff? Or is this
not really. Not really. I mean, some anxiety is healthy, right? I had like a normal, healthy level of anxiety.
Right.
I think. But
heart attack kind is not good.
Yeah. That's not good.
That's bad.
So that was it. And I got on the phone at like 3 a.m. I was like, "Mom, I can't beat this." I had no idea what was going on. So I went back home for a month, almost made it 30 days without alcohol, and went right back out to Spain, picked up right where I left off. I mean, I had some rituals that were, at the time, I was like, "Oh, this is normal." Again, I mean, I wake up at 6 a.m., walk across the street, get 2 beers and a box of wine and drink them all within 15 minutes, just so I go back to bed and sleep till noon or 1 or 2 p.m. That was my norm for like a year and a half. So I ended up walking away from this bar from Spain. Smartest decision I've ever made. Had to take the ego hat off, swallow a lot of pride, went back, moved in with the parents, assumed my drinking would not have made the trip with me. It did. Geographical cures rarely work. Made another geographical cure to Seattle, where I went to grad school at University of Washington. That brought me to beautiful Bozeman, Montana. And in 2010, I was starting to wisen up. Actually, 2009, I was starting to wisen up, say, okay, maybe it's alcohol. Maybe it's not anxiety. Maybe it's not depression. Maybe it's not all these other issues, ADHD, that psychologist, psychiatrist, whoever I talked to would tell me. Maybe it was alcohol. And so I started to explore this. In 2010, on January 1st, I stopped drinking. I only wanted to go for a month, but I made it 2.5 years, which was surprising that I made it that far.
Wow.
Yeah. And
just on sheer willpower, like you didn't start going to any programs or anything?
You're 100% correct, Arlena. And I'm a guy that has A lot of willpower. I do. And this backfires. It's not a good thing when it comes
it's a double-edged sword for sure.
Double-edged sword. Like I've got a sports background. I'm a no pain, no gain guy. Just get up, try harder. Willpower, right? You can do this. And that backfires with recovery. It does. And ironically, when I went to my very first AA meeting, I had a friend who was a gal who was struggling with alcohol, and me and another guy took her to an AA meeting in support for her.
Sure.
And here I am. I've been sober 2.5 years, and I'm hearing stories of people going around the room. They're saying, well, I ended up in prison. Well, after my second divorce, after my third DUI, after bankruptcy, after prison, after some guy killed somebody in the room.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And Arlena, after each story that hadn't happened to me yet, my eyes were getting bigger and bigger. And like, I was just like, oh my God, wait a second. I don't think I have a problem with alcohol because none of this stuff has happened. And I walked out that room and I drank 2 days later. And I think I had like 15 or 30 drinks that night. And I ended up at 2:30 in the morning after the gas stations had closed. I drank all the alcohol in the house, and I was Googling if I could drink hydrogen peroxide or rubbing alcohol. After there was no more alcohol left to drink. This is after 2.5 years without a drink. Like you got to be effing kidding me. So I woke up the next day. I was like, shit, that got out of hand fast. Maybe I was on the right path. So, then I had 10 months, then I had 4 months, then I had 2, then I had 20 days, then I had 8 days, then I had 3. Then it was like, oh shit, I don't think I'm ever going to get out of this again. And that's where the 2014, we already covered like the Peru Machu Picchu trip, that trip to South America. That was a rough summer.
Was that what you were considered to be your bottom, that trip?
No, I had a failed suicide attempt in 2014. And that summer, it was like there was many times where I like fully defeated. It's like I can't beat this. I won't be able to beat this. And suicide was like the best option. And it was kind of an accidental suicide attempt. So I went to a psychiatrist, and my psychiatrist wasn't in. So somebody filling in for them prescribed me like 30 Xanax or benzos. And normally I would request that gal would only give me like 1 or 2. So I just crushed them all and did them. And the people that I talked to, medical professionals, are like, yeah, that should have done the trick and then some. But here we are still chatting today, Arlena.
That's amazing. Okay, so you get all the benzos, and you said you crushed them. Does that mean you snorted them?
No. I mean, I just I think.
Oh, you crushed it like
25, and then all the other pills that I had. Yeah.
Oh my God.
I should have done it. I should have done the trick. And man, I'm smiling and laughing. It's not funny at all, but I'm in a moment now where it all had to happen, and it was a beautiful journey, and I don't think I would change a thing. Right, Arlena?
Yeah. No, oftentimes it's that hitting rock bottom that allows us to let go of all our old ideas, meaning that self-sufficiency, self-knowledge, self-will is going to cure our alcoholism, right? That's never the thing that does it. And, we're so indoctrinated in our society about, hustle harder and drive and all that stuff that, what that's saying is that we are responsible for fixing ourselves. But I'll tell you, Paul, if I could have fixed myself, I would have done it a long time ago. But, for me, it wasn't until I got into recovery that I was introduced to the idea that a power greater than myself could restore me to that kind of sanity. So, but let's talk about you, because I will make this about me if I...
No problem.
being the self-centered alcoholic that I am. Okay, so what happened? Did you end up going back to Alcoholics Anonymous, or where did you go from the failed suicide attempt?
Yeah. I mean, that wasn't even my sobriety date, really. I woke up the next day. I was like, you got to be kidding me. That didn't work. I'm still here. I'm still like back in square one. I mean, it sucked. It was terrible.
Like Groundhog Day, right?
Yeah, you nailed it. But so on September 7th, that's when I was done. I was DJing a wedding like 5 days before, and I knew I was not going to be able to finish the wedding, but B, like I was going to be rough shape. I got a DUI that summer too. So I did a smart thing, had a friend come pick me up. Told my parents I was going to go to rehab, but they didn't pick the phone after I called 95 times. called me back the next day and I said, you know what? I just feel different. And what had happened is I fully gave up. Like I just stopped fighting. When I decided to go to rehab, the unconscious part of the brain got that memo. And that was the first time that there was a collaborative effort between the conscious, the unconscious mind, the heart and the soul. They started beating to the same drum. They started moving forward on the same path. Before, it's just, you're being pulled in so many different directions. And as you mentioned, I didn't quite understand the higher power thing, but right at that moment, there was an opening, a conduit, where something besides me was guiding me. Mm. And so I went to an AA meeting, and then I went to another one. I did like 110 in 90 days. I didn't really fully resonate with it, but I kind of looked at the scales as like, well, what are my options here? There are tons of options, but like I did everything. And so right around a couple months of sobriety, I was walking to an AA meeting and I said the 3 most dangerous words that somebody with a drinking problem can have. I said, I got this. I don't need to go to this meeting. I looked at my watch and I was standing behind trees too because of the stigma. I was like, I got this. I've gone 2 months without alcohol. Like, I don't have a problem, right? I mean, just that sounds asinine as that sounds. The stigma. And then all of a sudden in my gut, I felt this thought show up. And I knew I was going to drink again if I didn't do something different. And the idea of a podcast showed up. And I was like, whoa, what is this? What is this? I didn't understand it, but I love podcasts. And I just knew I had to start a podcast. And this isn't like some divine message. We all get nudges and cues from the universe of where to go next. And I was just in a spot where
Why would you say that's not a divine message? Why not?
Well, I mean, it could be. It could be. I'm not saying, what I mean is I'm not special enough to get like my own personalized message. Everybody gets them. What I was at that moment, I was in a part of no mind where I was able to receive the message. Because everybody gets them all the time, but we're usually so entrenched with the egoic structures and the thinking patterns that we completely miss the cues, the pieces of intuition and wisdom and nudges of where we're supposed to go in life. So I got one. I listened and I did it, and I think it saved my life. There's no way to tell for sure. It was a risky gamble, Arlena. I started this podcast at like 5 months sobriety. And there was a lot of pressure, right? But perhaps I needed it because we're talking today. But it worked. And what doors it opened up for me was accountability and community. Accountability is when we talk about this, when we burn the ships, is how I like to phrase it.
Yeah. Do you want to tell that little story about burn the ships in case someone's not familiar?
Well, yeah. I mean, in 1519, Hernan Cortez landed in Veracruz. He sailed from the coast of Cuba to Veracruz to tackle the Aztec Empire, which nobody had been able to do for the previous 500 years. First thing he told his sailors when he arrived on the beach of Veracruz was burn the ships. Sailors are like, whoa, screw that. How are we going to get out of here? And that was his plan. You can't unburn the ships. You can't unhave those conversations. So Arlena, for the first 3 months after I uploaded the podcast, I was like, oh shit, what have I done? I had trouble sleeping. I was terrified of people hearing my deepest, darkest secret, the biggest challenge I've faced in life. However, it was the best thing I could have ever done. It turns out there's a couple more people than just myself struggling with alcohol, millions.
You're right.
Created accountability. And then someone was like, hey, what about a community? And then we started Cafe RE, and then we did meetups, and then we're going to Asia in January 2020 or 20.
Look at you. That is so beautiful. I was having a conversation with a sponsee of mine recently where we were talking about, what wants to be born. It's interesting that when we get sober and we, overcome this thing, it's like, now what? Suddenly it's like the purpose of life seems to change a little bit. We've received this gift. We've been relieved from this suffering through actions and community and knowledge and things like that. It's, a very natural response to want to shout it from the rooftops and save everyone else too. I just think it's amazing that this is what was born out of you listening to your intuition and then taking action on it. and you've done some pretty amazing things. I know your podcast has a pretty wide reach, and it's amazing you did this at 5 months sober.
Thank you. It was risky.
So let's talk about the risks a little bit, because I was, probably 20 years sober when I finally decided to pull the trigger. I was so scared and I'm very AA indoctrinated, but I'm a voracious learner. So I'm always looking for, I did like the Course in Miracles. I did therapy. I did, I read tons and tons of books. I'm always looking for different kinds of solutions, but what were some of the fears that you were wrestling with before you launched this? Was it fear of judgment from like the recovery community, or just sharing your darkest secret?
Sure. Yeah, great question. And I'll get that to a second. I just want to comment on what you said to your sponsee. And so what wants to be expressed when we quit drinking, what wants to be expressed through divinity or through just the universe, is our wholeness. And once we quit drinking, and once we get further enough down that road, we'll be like, oh, sobriety sucks. Like this, there's this huge challenge and I can't go back to alcohol. What that is the universe putting situations, life occurrences in front of us to help us build those circuits. It's crazy that once you quit drinking, encounters will happen with people, places, things, and ideas that will hurt in spots of your body. Like it will trigger things, but it's all working for you, because the expression that first wants to come through you is wholeness. And whatever's happening happening in your environment, none of it's happening to you, it's happening for you. As soon as I realized that, it was like year 2.5, year 3, that's when the magic started to happen on this journey. But let's back it up a little bit. What fears I had? Like there was, with the whole AA thing, there's traditions and rules, et cetera, et cetera. And I was fearful of that. Of course I was. I know other people on the podcast have been as well, which kind of sucks, right? Like, I want to like do this project to help other people drinking, but I'm afraid I'm going to make people mad who are in AA, so I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
It's stupid. I'm sorry. It's just stupid. And
well,
I've got as Bill sees it, an anonymity, and it's completely bass backwards how Bill saw anonymity from the start. From 1935 when AA was started, from where it's at now, the anonymity now is like, I hate to say it, sometimes like a curtain of shame that people can comfortably stand behind. However, I can tell you my fear was, and feel free to debate that if you want, but I can tell you my fear is completely false. Like even the people in AA have been so supportive of it. Never has there been a time where everybody in AA, out of AA, we're so ready to have this conversation, and people want to talk about it. Like people don't want to be anonymous anymore. This, like you see, it's just bubbling up. Of course, it needs to be anonymous for the people in there. It's a safe landing spot. What's said there has to stay there. But there's no way we're going to blast through this stigma if we keep it buttoned up and never talk about it.
No, I will not debate you on that. As a matter of fact, I will say that if anybody that's an AA big book thumper or student, if you go back and read the literature, they started it anonymously because the response that they were getting was so overwhelming that the few people who were there to help were just overwhelmed by the amount of inquiries they were getting. It's like they just couldn't handle all the requests that were coming in. So that's why they remained anonymous. It wasn't to hide behind the curtain of shame, like you were saying. And I think that's what it's become. It's, it's sort of a paradox where we do, like people go to therapy because you can talk to a therapist in confidence, like they're legally bound to keep your secrets, right? You need a safe place to air out all your bullshit, because all that shame, that's what keeps people from being honest. So it's kind of like, it's one of those double-edged swords, right? You need a safe place to talk, right? But I think they're confusing. I think it's time to change some of the traditions about anonymity. Mostly because mainstream media is telling our stories. And I feel like we should tell our own stories. Like we shouldn't allow an interpretation of our stories to hit mainstream media. We need to be able to speak for ourselves. So that's kind of why I decided.
I totally agree with that.
That's why I decided to do it. I actually had a girlfriend. I was wrestling. Like I had one of those inspired ideas. It's like one of those. it was like this idea that came on my heart. And it was like, I really want to do this. I had been doing a sales podcast and I really wanted to do one recovery, but I was afraid of what my community might say. And then I had a girlfriend that passed away. She was at an AA meeting at 6 a.m. and died at 9 in a car accident.
Whoa.
And she and I were about the same age. And I thought, I cannot let this dream die in me. You know what I mean? It was like one of those things that wanted to be born. And so I decided to, break through that fear and do the podcast anyway, even if people in my community were going to be mad at me. And I was like, well, they can't stop me.
Arlena, how many people are mad at you?
0.
Yeah. Zero. Now, I will, to be fair, the hardest part about doing the podcast is actually like the most criticisms. Hardest part is people in recovery. And I thought it would be like big alcohol. I thought like Budweiser would send me an email and be like, shut your fucking podcast down. Or normal drinkers being like, Paul, you're such a loser. Like, it's just not the case. Everybody, people who don't understand alcohol, but they hear about the podcast, or they don't have a drinking problem. They're like, holy shit, you do you. What's the name? I'm going to send the link to your podcast to my cousin who's struggling. That's okay. Like, and sometimes I get emails of criticism. People want to help, and I'm just interpreting that wrong, and I get defensive. But there have been some struggles and challenges with it, like anything. Really, like it's not.
Sure. Yeah. No, I haven't really had any blowback. A couple of people have sort of, long timers in my community being like, "Oh, maintain your anonymity," and I'm like, I wasn't anonymous about my drinking. I was
great answer.
You know what I mean? I completely made an ass of myself while I was drinking. I'm a stand-up person today. Why wouldn't I be proud of that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And things change. Times change, and times are changing. It's okay.
Yeah. I think eventually somebody's going to pick up the banner of the traditions and maybe, take that out about maintaining anonymity at the level of press, radio, and film.
Yeah. And, by the numbers, a guy named Lance Dode, the Sober Truth, by the numbers, it's a stagnant program. Although addiction is on the rise, there's about 1.5 million members in Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's a stagnant program. It's an age, the age continued. I think it was average age is 43. Now I think it's 40. I don't know. But if they don't change their stances on some of these things, the program may become obsolete in the upcoming future. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll debate you on that. I mean, I don't think it's stagnant. I mean, I continue to go through cycles of the steps only because as I go through the steps, I feel like that there's that old saying that if you work the steps will work you. Mm-hmm. And it's a process, right, that I go through with someone else. And I feel changed after I complete them. And because I'm different on the other end, when I address them again, I get something completely different because I'm different, right? So, and it served me for 25 years and counting. And I take what I like, I leave the rest, but I do a multitude of other things as well. It's not the only modality of, healing that I utilize.
And I had a fantastic sponsor my first year. Met with him every Wednesday at noon for a year. Fantastic guy. I can't mention his name out of his request, but love the program.
Yeah.
I hope it doesn't become obsolete, and I hope they make some changes. But if not, I respect the hell out of that decision too. Stick to your guns.
So tell me what you do. Even the big book talks about intense. There's nothing that ensures sobriety like intense work with another alcoholic, and you're in it up to your eyeballs. What do you do to maintain your sobriety now? Is it just your work carrying the message?
Yeah. Great question. And so I'm kind of exploring this pickle of you can't do this alone. And on this journey, Arlena, there are countless paradoxes, countless pickles to find yourself in. There's so many.
So many.
It's why recovery is so confusing. And I met with a listener. He was passing through town, and we had coffee. And he's like, "Hey, I just got a quick question, Paul. Like, you can't do this alone, but at the end of the day, like, you kind of have to." And I was like, "You know what? You're totally right." And what it means is it's internal versus external. And this is a concept that I've been exploring a lot this past year. So internal is where the connection will be bridged. And I feel addiction is an issue of disconnections where the heart and soul.
Agreed.
right? There's a disconnection with authentic relationships. There's a disconnection. There's self-loathing within. There's a disconnection with the mind, the body, and spirit. And we try to mollify this disconnection with external substances. The best solution the mind thought of was alcohol, and that worked for a long time, then it backfired. Okay, so we've got external ways to mollify the internal environment. And we can't do this alone. And the way most of us start when we get sober, including myself, is we can't do this alone, and we find external communities. We work with other struggling alcoholics. We work with other people who want to quit drinking. Great way, great start. However, this is still working with external items in our external environment to mitigate the internal turmoil, to bridge the internal gap. Like I said, fantastic way to start. And I don't think it'll ever end for me. However, you can kind of see the pitfalls with this. What happens if you move? What happens if you get in an argument with somebody? There's a lot of stuff that can happen. And so what I've been focusing on this last year is more the internal of going internal. And this is where the stuff of meditation comes into play, of sitting. I have sat, there's this bench by my office that I probably log 5 to 7 hours a week there. And
wow.
At first it was tough, Arlena. It's tough. Like sitting solo by myself, like that's terrible. I was miserable. Mm-hmm. But I knew I had to push through that and just sit and be. And I've doubled down big time on meditation and just sitting and being with myself. It's okay to have a Friday night alone, me, myself, and a dog, just a campfire up in beautiful in the forest of Montana. Mm-hmm. And so that's been a shift in the last couple of years of mine, is how I'm really building the circuits and getting my sobriety fuel of things that aren't contingent on external items. But like I said, I mean, that's how I started, was just everything was external. Pastry, Reese's Pieces, money, other people that didn't drink, right? Everything was external. Yeah. And I won't say I'm wisening up. It's just the body told me where to go next. And the body was like, okay, this is great, but we need to learn how to be still, to sit silently and be okay and even enjoy it. Yeah.
That's step 11. No, I think that's very common. Like when I first got sober, I was all about the community and the fellowship, and then we do bump up against other people that are like us. I mean, AA is not the hotbed of mental health, but we get to practice loving other people while they're expressing their character defects, which I think allows us to sort of find love and compassion for ourselves as we wrestle with our own. But I love the idea of balancing the external, and like it's like you sounded like you're evolving, and you know, you kind of outgrew the extreme focus on external, and now it's like you've evolved and you need something deeper and more sustainable. You know, even, you know, I don't mean to keep harping on the big book. I don't consider myself a thumper, but you know, it does talk about there will come a time when no human power could have relieved your alcoholism, right? You need to develop that relationship, dare say, with like a higher power. And I'm just curious, where are you in terms of higher power? Like, how do you describe it or experience it? Maybe through meditation, or can you walk me through that a little bit?
Yeah, Arlena, great question. So the 12 steps of AA is not a religious program, despite I think 5 out of 12 or 7 out of 12 have a direct reference to God. It's not a religious program at all. Yeah. It is a spiritual program, 100%. Yeah. And I have not chosen to go down a spiritual path, but I am being fully pulled, and I have to listen. I can't ignore that. And I'm a firm believer that this is where we must go. And I don't want to say spiritual, but where we must go is internal. And if we go internal long enough, then we start to see, okay, there is way more going on than we can see. In fact, quantum physics shows that really 3 to 4% of what we see is only, we only see 3 to 4% of what it actually is. And similarly, so Bill W. in 1934 took a powerful plant medicine called belladonna. This is a powerful hallucinogenic, right? And many people don't know that AA might not exist had it not have been for a powerful psychedelic trip.
Mm-hmm.
In April of 2018, I did an ayahuasca retreat in Costa Rica.
Oh my God. Don't let me forget to ask you about that because ayahuasca.
Yeah. And it blew my mind, and it's a similar result from other people, what I've heard. And since then, it cracked open the spirituality component inside me, which is beautiful. Colors are more vibrant on trees. Things smell different. Sunsets look different. The sky, the way the clouds are moving, they look different. 95% of the time, this is beautiful. 5% of the time, I'm like, oh shit, this is scary. Because it's altering consciousness. It's like
you had a guide, I would imagine.
What's that?
You had a guide during your ayahuasca experience?
Definitely. Yeah, I went to a place called Rhythmia in Costa Rica. Highly recommended. It's a 5-star resort. Incredibly gifted shamans. Ayahuasca is not the answer, but it will definitely give you some signposts of where to go.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the most powerful, profound healing tool. In fact, some of these plant medicines, including cannabis, and I'm going to with CBD oil, right? I mean, there's cannabis, there's ways to extract the THC, but we're seeing a huge proliferation of CBD oils that can simply rebalance the body has an endocannabinoid system that can get out of balance. Some of these authentic CBD oils can do that. Plant medicine, cannabis is a powerful plant medicine in the flower format. And even in the detoxification process, strands with THC have been proven to be way more beneficial than benzos and other treatments. We're starting to see psilocybin. I think that's in phase 3 of testing. I think within 3 to 4 to 5 years, you'll be able to do a psilocybin guided trip with a therapist. And what they're seeing with the stuff to treat depression, anxiety, and addiction, they haven't seen these results previously. Iboga is a powerful plant medicine that comes from Africa, and they're seeing to treat heroin. There's ibogaine clinics in Mexico and Costa Rica. And I think America will get their act together. They are with psilocybin, with some of these other plant medicines. And what it does, it allows your body and mind to do its own healing. You can get into an environment where you can almost lift the needle into those deepened grooves of thinking and actions and place the needle somewhere else. It's like a biological control alt delete.
Mm-hmm.
And it blew my mind, and I was forever changed after that.
Do you happen to follow Tim Ferriss, his podcast? He's funding an incredible amount of research with some organizations in the UK that are studying how the use of ayahuasca and ibogaine to treat severe addictions. Have you seen that?
I have not, but I have not from Tim Ferriss, but I've read several articles about that.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. I'll link some of these articles. And, it's kind of a funny thing. Like, this is not something I feel like I'll ever be able to do because I kind of just want to refrain from all that stuff. But I do see the need for it in people that are, chronic relapsers, people who, I know some people who every time they relapse, take it to the brink of death. And I just don't, there's a few people I have in mind. I just don't know if they're going to survive. I've just seen so many people die over the years. So I think that in these cases, these real extreme cases, these are amazing therapies that are hopefully going to be tested and brought to the US. So, and listen, why are we having such a problem with these things where, people are on Xanax and like these opioid based drugs? It's like, it doesn't make it's not a lot of common sense to me. It's like we're using heroin, but we can't use these other medications that'll remove those mental blocks.
Yeah.
And makes no sense to me.
And Arlena, I reached 3.5 years alcohol free, and I found myself stuck. I didn't know it, but my egoic structures were so intense.
Yeah.
The mind was taking me down a bad path. And, and so my plan was to go to Costa Rica, do this ayahuasca retreat and not talk about it. However, a couple of days after, when I got back, I was like, holy shit, I started a podcast to share resources with people that are beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be true to my mission if I didn't talk about it. And on face value, like you can see, like, wait, you're just going down and taking a drug to heal yourself? Like, that doesn't make sense. But what we talked about earlier, like how many people have emailed you and say your podcast is going against rules? I had a handful of people be like, how could you? I will never listen to your podcast. But like the overwhelming majority, including people in AA, were like, yes, Yes. I'm so glad, like, even like you said, you're like, I might not do it, but yes, I'm so glad you talked about this because people more than ever right now are ready for alternative treatments. Arlena, I don't think we need to cover how abysmal the success rates are from this, how abysmal rehab rates are.
Exactly.
Even I hate to say it, the success rates in AA aren't quite as high as we think they are. And people are ready more than ever right now because what we're currently doing to treat addiction is coming up short, especially Western medicine. I mean, their answer to treat addiction, you just mentioned a couple of benzos, antidepressants. I mean, there's not much.
And jail. People are going to jail. Incarceration.
Tough love. That's Western medicine's best medicine is tough love. Doesn't work.
Such bullshit. Yeah, no, it's not good.
Yeah.
Well, these are very exciting. Do you know off the top of your head what podcast that was that you shared about your experience?
170.
Oh, look at you. That must have been a popular one, huh?
Yeah. That was a fun one.
Yeah. Okay. I'm totally going to leave a link to that one because I think I can't wait to hear that. I haven't heard that one. So I'll leave a link to that one too. Listen, we booked an hour and I could talk to you forever. You have such, I really appreciate your thoughtfulness. You're clearly a really smart guy and I love what you're doing. I love what you're doing. I feel like you're helping a ton of people and you have such a great reach. And I'm so tempted to take you up on this offer to do the workshop. It sounds amazing. And Bossman, when is that?
August 14th to the 18th. And it is. I just drove to Boise a couple weeks ago. It's an 8-hour drive. So.
You did? Who were you visiting? You were visiting a friend or something?
No, it did a craft commerce, like a content creator conference. It was awesome.
Content. I didn't know about that.
Beautiful part of the country.
Oh, nice. Okay. Well, that sounds very exciting. I'm totally going to check that out. But listen, thank you so much for taking the time out to be on my podcast and share your story with my listeners and all your experiences. I hope everyone listens to your podcast as well. So that's it. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Arlena. I've done a lot of interviews and you're very good at what you do.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.
You too.
One last thing before you go, if you enjoyed the podcast today, please don't forget to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher and leave a review. And if you'd like to make a donation to the podcast and help me keep the lights on, you can do so by visiting odatchat.com. There's a donation button or membership button on the right-hand side. Have a great day. Thank you so much for joining us.